Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. Each episode will bring you in-depth discussion with experts, community leaders, and analysts who will share their insights, experiences, and predictions. From local elections to global diplomacy, we'll provide you with the tools and perspectives you'll need to navigate today's real-world landscape.
Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. This is Lisa Chafee. Thank you for joining us this evening. I have here in studio Representative Gary Click, who is serving his second term in the Ohio House of Representatives. Representative Click is from the 88th House District, which encompasses all of Sandusky and Seneca counties. In 2006, Representative Click accepted the position of pastor to the Fremont Baptist Temple and has held that position ever since. And in over 30 years of ministry, Pastor Click has served in many aspects, including youth ministry, bus ministry, writing, radio, Christian education, and lobbying Congress on behalf of churches and Christian schools. He has also served as a chaplain for law enforcement and in hospice care. Representative Click earned a Bachelor of Religious Education from Midwestern Baptist College in 1990, and it was there that he met and married his wife, Nanette. They are the proud parents of 4 boys, Nathaniel, Zachary, Garrison, and Micah, and are the proud grandparents of 4 lovely children. Representative Click, thank you for joining us.
Hey, well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Lisa. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, yes, thank you. So I guess it's been about a year and a half ago that we first met at the State House about when I was testifying for the SAFE Act bill.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
It's been an interesting journey with that bill. So give us some background on how it came to be when we first met, how you got there.
Okay, well, no, that's a great question. And it all began when somebody brought in some parents, just a group of parents. We call them the mama bears, but there were both some mamas and some papas that were there. And one of them was a physician. And they began telling not just me, but myself and some other legislators, their stories and their heartaches, their heartbreaks, and their woes, and with tears in their eyes. And they were talking about how their children, some of them had been manipulated in the schools, some of them had been manipulated in the hospitals, and they were going around the parents and in some cases, when they did talk to the parents or when the parents did go for help, the parents were manipulated in a couple ways that maybe we can talk about as we get going in this. But they were looking for someone who would stand up and do something and stand up for these kids. And it was just, it's too hard for me to say no to those tears and to those families and to those heartaches. And as we went along, and I met many other young people who were they're called detransitioners, but they're just kids who got sucked up into this gender ideology, and it just breaks my heart. And we've got to protect these kids. And so I said yes, I would do this, and we've been on that journey. And fortunately we've passed it in the House, 64 to 28, is a very popular bill, and it's in the Senate now, and I look forward to what's going to take place there.
So what exactly does the acronym stand for?
That's a great question. So the SAFE Act stands for Saving Adolescents from Experimentation. And that's what all this gender ideology is. And when we start giving these kids hormone blockers and cross-sex hormones, it's a big experiment. They've not having any proven results, no long-term studies. It's an ideology that is posing as a science. And so we're just saying, listen, we're not telling people how to live their lives. We're just saying, listen, make sure, because these changes are permanent, they are dangerous, and they are risky. And so let's make sure that a child is not a child. Let's save the adulting for adults and let the children be children. And you have to be at least 18 before you can do any of those things. That's what this bill says.
So once it's passed, what exactly will the bill do or not do?
So the bill won't do anything. It won't change anything for adults, for those who are over 18. But if you are under 18, that means that you will not be able to get the puberty blockers. And that's important. That's really the crux of this bill. Some people have thought that the whole idea was about the surgeries on minors, which is happening, by the way. Some people have denied that it's happening. It does happen. We've got proof of that. But not only does it, but it starts off with the puberty blockers. Now, kids generally and legitimately can have gender dysphoria, which is just really an extreme dissatisfaction with your natural sex. Um, and they confuse the words gender and sex, but they mean the same thing, but they try to separate them and say you might have a male sex but a female gender and things like that, and that's just not real. That's fake. And so they confuse kids by teaching them things about like the gender unicorn or the genderbread man. And so there's really some grooming that goes on with those things. But some kids are legitimately confused, and many times that happens because of other stressors in their life. There's one lady that I've met, and she came and she testified, and she had been abused as a child. Her brother was there with her. He wasn't molested, she was. And so in her mind, she thought, I would feel safer if I was a boy. So she started calling herself Timmy, and she told all of her teachers and everyone at school that she wanted to be a boy. And fortunately, she's a little bit older. And I don't mean she's old, but I mean she's before that generation where this was a popular thing. They begin to say there's something going on here, and they begin to dig in deeper, and they found out what happened. And so they said, okay, let's help her. And so they helped her with that, and she was able to reconcile with who she is, and live a very successful life. Now, the statistics tell us, Lisa, that if a child goes on puberty blockers, there is a 98% chance that they will go on to the opposite sex hormones and on to perhaps even surgery. Now, the reality is that if a child is just left to their own devices, you you just talk with them, you add value to that child, you don't try to change the child per se. You just let that child grow up, and you support that child, with mentally and a positive self-awareness and so forth. That child will naturally outgrow those feelings through the course of puberty. Puberty is the natural cure, it's the natural remedy. And anywhere from 85 to 95% of kids with gender dysphoria will naturally outgrow it. It does not need an intervention, it does not need an action. But again, if you give them the puberty blockers, they don't grow, they don't develop. It also stunts brain development as well as bone development. It also sterilizes children and so forth. And so you're taking all of these negative interventions for something that's really just it's a mental health issue. And mental health issues are not anything that should belittle a person or make you think less of a person. It should inspire compassion on all of us, but they need mental health help. They don't need physical help. This is a mental diagnosis, not a medical diagnosis.
Agreed. And I read the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, and I highly recommend
Excellent.
everybody read this book. What really astonished me is the number of young girls from sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade tend to be middle class, tend to be white. And as they're finding out, a lot of them have autism.
Hmm.
And they're just trying to,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah, just trying to fit in. Some of them, as you were saying, described about the other woman, that it's not so much that they don't want to be a girl or that they want to be a boy. They just don't want to be a girl because of the things that they're exposed to, the horrific pornography,
True.
the way women are treated, just in general in life, seeing how a lot of women are treated. It's a scary thing to look at that as a young girl and think, oh my
Right.
gosh, is this what life is going to be like for me as an adult? And so they're just trying to escape that, but they don't really want to be a boy.
Right. Social media is a huge factor in that. And then again, as you know, when a young girl and young girls and young boys approach it in different ways, um, ironically, gender still plays a role in it. And young girls, especially when they become, objects in the eyes of some young men or even older men, for personal gratification, they feel objectified and they don't like it. Sometimes they are, as you say, they're groped, or they could be molested, or they're mocked, or and it's just an uncomfortable time for some young ladies. And it's not like they feel like they're men, but they just feel like their femininity is betraying them and it's hurting them, and it makes them uncomfortable. And it's an awkward stage for young girls. I get it. And so this becomes their out, and someone tells them, again, other people will tell them, "Oh, if you're uncomfortable, you must really be a man." And they just feed this stuff into these vulnerable young girls, and they bite, and they take that. And of course, you and I both know Chloe Cole,
Yes.
and she was one who went through that, and at the age of 15 had a double mastectomy. That's not reversible. You can't change that.
Right.
But they were, they use these things like on her. Or I was watching a video with Luca today, and others. They will say, well, they'll say to the parents, they'll say, well, your child will commit suicide if you don't support them, and they have no foundation for that. There's no basis in that. And I was watching Luca's video today. She was saying, I wasn't thinking that. I was telling them I wasn't thinking that. But they're telling my mom and dad that I'm going to commit suicide if they don't support me and agree that I'm a man when I'm really not a man. And they send some of these kids on these test trials that are dangerous to these kids. And then you have people like Luca, who, beautiful young woman, but Luca has a very deep voice. A lot of these young ladies, like I said, have had they call it euphemistically top surgery. It's a double mastectomy. And that takes away a huge part of their womanhood. And it's like, several of these young ladies have told me, and they've told our whole committee, and they said, now if I don't even know if I can get pregnant because of all these drugs that I've taken, and even if I do, I know that I will never be able to, nurse my child. And so an essential part of who I am has been stripped away from me and robbed from me when I was too young to understand what I was giving up. And so we just need to put a stop to that. That's abusive of children. It is abusive of the medical profession to be doing this. It's totally unprofessional. And we need to like say no to them. They make a lot of money on this, and they're not really there for the kids when it comes to these things. They're there to support an ideology, and we want to protect the kids. And what's amazing too, as you know, Lisa, because you've been around, is that we have a wide array of support. You know, this is not just a right wing ordeal. Many of the people who've testified on our committee are Democrats. Aaron Brewer, who I mentioned earlier, not by name, but she's the one I was talking about. Aaron was a delegate for Bernie Sanders in 2016. We had a mother come testify whose daughter was identifying as trans. This mother has been in a same sex relationship for 25 years. We had two lesbian young ladies that are married to each other that came and testified because one of them identified as trans. And we've had some other people behind the scenes who've worked for testimonies, things like that, that are, gay, lesbian, bisexual, what have you. There are this is not just a matter of fact, I often say this is a very pro LGBTQ bill. Some people don't like it when I say that, but the reality is what many people are doing is taking these young kids who, if it might be a young effeminate guy who maybe he's going to grow up and be gay, I don't know, but they say, well, let's turn you into a girl. And so, or a young girl who maybe is a little more masculine, a little more butch or tomboy or something like that. They say, well, you're not good enough to be a woman. Let's turn you into a guy. And the ladies, the feminists, are actually on our side. It's an interesting combination of people who support this. Feminists are on our side on this, and they get called. There's a pejorative term for them among the trans community. They call them TERFs,
Right.
which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. But really, what we all have in common, regardless of whether we're an atheist, atheists are supporting this, or whether we're a Christian like myself and like you, or whether we're a conservative or a Democrat or a Republican, what everyone has in common that supports this is medical. This is irreversible. Let's just make sure kids are able to grow up and sort through this and make their own decisions. It's called informed consent. Children are not able, they're not capable of providing informed consent. And so let's just, let the kids be kids, save the adulting for the adults. Let someone grow up before they make these permanent, irreversible, life changing medical decisions. We're not telling you what kind of pronouns to use. We're not telling you how to dress or what name you want to use. We're just saying medical decisions, irreversible medical decisions, should not take place until you are an adult.
And that is what many of our counterparts in Europe have decided. Tavistock Clinic, open for
Correct.
what, 40 years, have now
Yes.
stopped doing
Hmm.
procedures on minors. I don't know if they're still doing them on adults, but they've definitely stopped doing them on children. And I remember reading a case that really spawned their decision was that of an 11-year-old girl who had been on the puberty blockers who went to go have surgery, the bottom surgery. She wanted to be a boy. They did not have it. She did not have enough excess skin for them to create an artificial penis for her. And then they discovered that
Mm.
her bones were so brittle, she had the bones of an 88-year-old woman.
Well, and that's what the puberty blockers will do to you. They cause osteopenia, osteoporosis, brittle bones. That's the puberty blockers are stripping your bones of their calcium and their density. And that's I had not heard that story, and that's tragic. I hate to hear those things. But they were 20 years ahead of us in doing these procedures. They've seen the results, and they've stopped. They've cut it out for minors. I said, "No, this is we see the results. They're horrendous. They're not working." Cara Bell is a great example of this, and she sued the Tavistock and won. And they're like, "Wait, this just we've been down this road. We see the results. Let's back up." At the same time, they're stomping on the brakes over here in America. There's people who want to stomp on the gas and go forward, and somehow they think that it's going to work over here when it didn't work over there. But the good news is there are multiple states. We were one of the first states to introduce legislation. We weren't the first, but we were probably the third, second or third in that line. And many of those states have surpassed us, and they've passed the legislation. Um, and many of them have looked to us and what we're doing here in Ohio for some ideas. I've spoken with some of the other legislators and so forth, but I think we're going to get this done, and we're going to get it done right. We've taken a very measured approach. We've gone through the process. We've listened to all sides. I've talked to all sides, all kinds of people. People who agree, people who disagree. I've given everyone let everyone have their voice, as well as we have done so in committee. But in the end, I think we're going to do what's the right thing for kids. We're not going to be pressured. We're not going to be bullied. We're going to do what's right for families, and that is to say, wait till you grow up.
Exactly. I mean, it's already been scientifically proven that the human brain's not fully developed until at least age 25. And
Right.
how many instances over the last few years have we heard of teenagers doing these stupid TikTok stunts like swallowing Tide Pods? So if they're willing to do that, that and alone says they're not ready to make these kind of decisions. And that's such an
Yeah.
emotional decision. But what's scary is the medical providers are starting to treat children as young as 3 years old for gender dysphoria. When my son was 3, he wanted to be Batman.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
how can you
I've heard
say
people
that they
say I wanted to be a truck when I was three. They want
right.
they don't turn them into transformers. Kids are creative and imaginative, and and then there's also this uh, factual disorder. They call it factual disorder in another. It used to be called Munchausen syndrome.
Right.
And there are some, and sometimes, I'm not saying this is the case every time, but there have been some documented cases where that has actually happened. And there's one lady who goes out and speaks broadly. I've mentioned her in my testimony. She's even given TED Talks on this, supporting your trans child. But when you pay attention to what she says, it's crazy. She said, my child told me in the womb that they were a boy. Well, it was a girl. But somehow that child told her while she was pregnant that she was a boy. And that's just odd. That's without the realm of sanity. That is factitious disorder in another. And some of these mothers, again, not all. I don't want to like paint with a broad brush. There are some mothers who need that attention, and this is the way that they do it: is to groom their child in this fashion. And there's been some documented cases of that that you can find very easily online.
Right. So one of the you mentioned the talk of suicide earlier, and I've been able to talk to many of these same people that you have and some more about, well, they told me, do you want a living daughter or a dead son? That they will commit suicide if they don't get to go down this path. In reality, once they start the path, the suicide rate is even higher.
It goes up. Yes. In fact, so what they do is they try to convince you that their suicide rate goes down with gender affirming care, and they will tell you it saves lives. That's not true. What happens is you get a temporary euphoria. Someone who goes down that road gets a temporary euphoria. Hey, I'm taking these drugs. I mean, really, they're taking drugs. For young girls, they're taking testosterone, and testosterone feels empowering in a young lady. And then young guys who take that estrogen and they have that burst of emotional weight that comes with that, and that's what they want. They feel more feminine, and so something that's a sudden change feels good, and you're getting what you want, and your body begins to adapt to some of those things, and it becomes exciting for these kids, and so they say it saves life, and their depression goes down temporarily. And so they say, see, we proved it. No, those are all short term, low quality studies. But the long term studies show that, after 10 years, like you say, when they reach, the mid 20s, sometimes the late 20s, the satisfaction goes way, way down. And in fact, the statistics tell us that they are 20 times more likely to actually take their own life after transition. I don't mean that they have ideations like they talk about for the teenagers. These are actually accomplishments where they actually complete the act and take their own life. And so it's very dangerous. So it is life saving to get them to put this off, hold off, wait till you're more mature. And then if that's what you want to do, if that's what you think is normal, at least you have a stronger and a better mental capacity to sort through.
Right. So on November 7th, we are going to be in Ohio voting on a constitutional amendment that, if passed, would enshrine abortion into our state constitution. And the way that that amendment is worded, they don't use the word woman, they say individual, and they say it is for reproductive rights. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that if that's passed, that will actually nullify the SAFE Act.
Well, that's what they're after. It's very subtle. It's written by lawyers, obviously, and it's because it doesn't say women, and it does say it's not limited to abortion. And so, if it's not just for women and it's not limited to abortion, what else? Reproductive rights. So, when you are sterilizing children, they might classify that as a reproductive right. And so, actually, there was a resolution down in Cincinnati in the schools to perhaps, or in the city council, I should say, to report parents who did not support the children with gender affirmation. So if this goes into the Constitution, you could be qualified as a bad parent if you don't affirm your child's preferred gender and pronouns, and maybe get reported for something like that. But also, Planned Parenthood gives out these hormones, these puberty blockers in different places, And there's nothing to say that they wouldn't start doing that to minors without parental consent, because you can't ask questions. You can't, it would be a reproductive right, so to speak. Only a court can tell you for sure on that. A court would have to make that decision, but that's certainly how they're targeting it. Targeting it. That's what they want to see happen. Now, they're not advertising that real big, but the reality is that's the only explanation for the why they chose that mysterious wording.
It's very scary. And you mentioned Cincinnati in 2018, there were two cases of teenagers being removed from the custody of their parents because their parents
Yes,
would not affirm their gender identity. The state
that
removed
is true.
custody.
That's true. And that's one thing that we have in this bill as well, to say that you cannot, take custody away from a parent. That is in the SAFE Act, um, based on their refusal to support gender affirming care.
So, what would you say to the opposition? I've had these discussions many times in person and on social media about this, that you're interfering with their parental rights to raise their children. And if they want their children to go down this path, they should be allowed to.
Well, you and I both support parental rights. Our parental rights are not absolute. You don't have the authority as a parent to abuse your children, number one. Number two, several years ago in the 132nd General Assembly, there was a group of immigrants who their practice was to practice genital mutilation on their young ladies, because that supposedly kept them more faithful to their husbands later in life. And they would give them, clitorectomies and things like that. And it's hard for us in our culture to imagine that, but that's what they were doing. And so they passed a law, and it passed 100%. It was bipartisan. No, you can't do that. Yeah, that's not acceptable here in Ohio. Doesn't matter if the parents agree to this, if the parents want to do this. There's a limit on what parents can do. And this is no different. This is a genital mutilation. Even before surgery, the drugs will mutilate a young child's genitalia. And so there are lines, there are limits. And this is one of those limits. You cannot do permanent damage to your child just because you're the parents.
Right. So, the next step in passing the SAFE Act bill, which, by the way, has been combined with the Save Women's Sports Act, correct?
That's true. Yes.
So, we've passed it in the House. Now the Senate's about to come back in session. Do we know yet when those hearings are going to be scheduled? How many hearings there'll
No,
be?
we do not know at this point, because we passed it out really just before we ended for summer recess. And so the Senate has not even had time to assign it to a committee.
Okay.
So when they come back in, I imagine they'll assign it to a committee, and then that chairman will have to process it and take a look at things. So we don't have a timeline at this point.
Okay. So, for anybody who would like to testify in person or in writing, how can they accomplish that?
Well, the best thing to do would be to just send us an email. My office it's rep 88 at ohiohouse.gov. And so if you have a testimony to share, if you have some personal relevance in this, send your testimony there, and you can let us know if you just want to send written testimony, or if you want to testify in person. And then we'll be able to see what we can facilitate, make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for joining us. Um,
Well, you're welcome.
and I hope I'll see you at the State House for sure. I'll be there.
I look forward to it.
So thank you again, our listeners, for tuning in. And just to leave you with some immortal words of Ronald Reagan: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same.